another kind of interesting anti-aging drug called calorie restriction mimetics. So what they do in somewhat different ways is they trick the body into thinking that it's not getting as many calories as it would like. And that induces a whole bunch of revision of the priorities of our metabolism, so as to essentially put more effort into preventative maintenance in the body and to put less effort into things like reproduction and growth.
Welcome to the Mindfulness Experience Podcast. My name is Keith Fiveson. We're here to explore the intersection of consciousness, science, and technology, and we're an official media partner for the Wonderland Miami 2023 conference happening November the 9th through the 11th. Today's guest is Dr. Aubrey de Grey, a world-renowned biomedical gerontologist and pioneer in anti-aging research. Dr. de Grey is the founder, president, and chief science officer of the LEV Foundation, a biomedical research and advocacy charity focused on repairing the molecular and cellular damage of aging. He has dedicated his career to redefining how we view aging, and through his research has made groundbreaking progress towards delaying and potentially eliminating age-related diseases. He has an impressive scientific background with achievements. Dr. de Grey is highly sought after as a speaker, and he's known for his captivating talks on longevity, aging, and the future of medicine. He's a highlighted keynote at the Wonderland 2023 conference, and we're honored to have him here today to share his thoughts on combination rejuvenation treatments in mice and their relevance to humans. All right. Aubrey, so glad to have you here today. How's your spirit? I know you're involved with some other things right now, and I really want to thank you for being here. How's it going?
Oh yeah, it's a pretty busy life right now, especially this time of the year. There's a lot of conferences and so on. But yeah, I'm feeling good. Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, great. Well, we're really excited that you're going to be at the Wonderland conference, and that's beautiful. Let me ask you, you're doing a lot of speaking and you're a distinguished speaker. Certainly, can you share your journey into the anti-aging research area with us and what inspired you to pursue it, and perhaps what you might be sharing at the conference?
Sure. So I got into this field about 30 years ago when I discovered, rather by accident, that in general, most biologists were not very interested in aging, which had never occurred to me. I had always assumed that everybody knew and understood that aging was the world's most important problem, and thus that biologists would be working rather hard on it. And I found out that that wasn't the case. So I basically switched fields. I was in a nice circumstance where I was able to do that. And so, yeah, that's how I got into it. I mean, I had always known since I was a kid that aging was the main thing we should be working on. And it had just never occurred to me that other people would not think the same.
Right.
So in terms of what I'm doing, what I'm going to talk about in Wonderland, well, I mean, I guess I'll basically summarize the work that we're doing at LEV Foundation, which is, you summarized it. It's combination mouse lifespan experiments, mainly. The idea is that we have reached the point in biomedical research now against aging where we can start to take the last step in putting in place the approach to keeping people healthy as they get older that I first propounded more than 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. That approach involves the repair of the various types of molecular and cellular damage that the body does to itself throughout life. Now, of course, the body's a really, really complicated machine, so it does many different types of damage to itself, and you've got to fix all of them. And that means that the approach to keeping people healthy has to be very much a divide and conquer one. Now, of course, some of these approaches to repairing various types of damage are more difficult to implement than others. And so some of them are not ready for prime time, even in mice yet. but some of them are.
Mm.
And the next step, the last step, of course, is to put them together in the same mice at the same time and see what happens. Because there, of course, will be cases where, for example, two things don't dovetail well together and you have to adjust. So these are the kinds of things we're trying to find out, and I'll be talking about that.
Great. Well, that's it's very intriguing, and of course, when we look at Wonderland, it's going to be a conference around the science, the research, a lot of it around psychedelics and entheogens. So I'm wondering where the play is there and how that intermingles and what people might expect in that particular regard. Because you've also talked about the 7 types of aging damage and how they lead to age-related diseases. And I'm just wondering if there's a confluence or an intersection here.
There is an intersection, but it's a bit tangential. The thing that we really have to take into account if we are looking at let's say, the mind-body interaction, the extent to which one's psychology influences aging, is it doesn't influence what kinds of molecular and cellular damage accumulate, but it does influence how rapidly they accumulate. And that means that at the moment, when we don't have medicines to repair most of the types of damage that we need to repair, the only thing we have in the meantime is to slow down the rate at which that damage is generated. And certainly a number of things, especially relating to minimizing stress, can quite powerfully do that. So, whatever works, really. I mean, I myself am not in the psychedelic field at all. I don't take anything, I don't study anything in that space, but the reason I'm probably somewhat relevant to Wonderland is because, indeed, there is an intersection between the two fields.
So, in other words, if we start taking a look at post-traumatic stress disorder or treatment-resistant depression or things of that nature, which in a lot of this field, we start taking a look at psychedelic assisted therapy to go ahead and I'm a vet, I'm a Army vet, and we work with vets to go ahead and help them deal with trauma. So what I hear you saying is that certainly is one of the 7 types of aging that damage that can happen in terms of the internal growth of cells. Is this right?
I'm not saying it's one of the types. I'm saying it's an influence on the rate of accumulation of all of the types.
Got it. Okay. Got it. So what are the 7 types of aging damage, that happens? Because I know you've talked about this, and I'm very interested to make sure that I've got the boxes checked off on all 7 of them, that I'm okay. I don't want to die right away.
Well, so like I said, at the moment, you can't check those boxes because the therapies mostly don't exist yet. And so what you can do is the other stuff that we've just been talking about, try to slow down the rate at which things happen. So what we're developing is a variety of therapies for these things. So the stem cell therapies, because one of the types of damage is the loss of cells dying and not being automatically replaced by the division of other cells. And then there's various anti-cancer therapies, because, of course, one of the types of damage is the accumulation of cells that are no longer under cell cycle control. In other words, they're dividing when they shouldn't. Then there's also something that's been quite in the news over the past 10 years or so, senescent cells. The word senolytics has become quite a buzzword in this field and in the media. And
those are the zombie cells, is that right?
That's exactly right, yeah. So senolytics are all about selectively killing off those zombie cells. So that's the third one. The other ones are more at the molecular level. So 2 of them involve simply waste products. And the reason there are 2 is because I distinguish between waste products that accumulate inside cells and waste products that accumulate in the spaces between cells, the extracellular space. The reason it makes sense to have those 2 be distinct is because the ways to eliminate them that we're pursuing are a bit different. We're using the immune system against the ones outside cells, and we're using bacterial enzymes mainly against the ones inside cells. And then there are a couple of others. First of all, there's mitochondrial mutations. So mitochondria are these special parts of the cell that perform the chemistry of breathing. They combine nutrients with oxygen in order to extract energy from the nutrient. And they have their own DNA, which accumulates mutations much more rapidly than the regular DNA in our nucleus of our cells does. So that's a problem, and we have ways to essentially make those mutations harmless. Or we're developing that. And then finally, there's this kind of lattice of proteins called the extracellular matrix, made of proteins like collagen and elastin. And this matrix is very important for the biophysical properties of various tissues, such as, it's responsible for not getting excessively high blood pressure, for example. What happens during life is that the extracellular matrix becomes less elastic as a result of chemical changes that accumulate spontaneously over time. And this elasticity is quite important because, if, for example, in terms of blood pressure, the major arteries become less elastic, the heart has to pump harder, you end up with higher blood pressure. It's the same chemistry that actually leads to wrinkles, so it has cosmetic relevance as well.
Oh, wow. So I'm very interested in in all of those areas, and certainly from a intervention viewpoint, to be able to go ahead and do the right things. I'm a meditator. This is the mindfulness experience. We do believe in breath work. We believe in the body, mind, the spirit, what you put in your body, as well as rest, the proper rest, and obviously to keep the stress down in terms of relationships. But the senolytics area, I've read something about that in terms of some of the compounds that are out there, whether or not it's looking at metformin. Metformin?
Metformin,
yeah, metformin. And then there's rapamycin, which is another one. Do you have some sense about those, whether or not, and I know some folks that are on those, so I'm just wondering your view of that.
Okay, so rapamycin and metformin are not senolytics. They are another kind of interesting anti-aging drug called calorie restriction mimetics. So what they do in somewhat different ways is they trick the body into thinking that it's not getting as many calories as it would like, into thinking it's in a famine, basically, even if it isn't. And that induces a whole bunch of essentially revision of the priorities of our metabolism, so as to essentially put more effort into preventative maintenance in the body, and to put less effort into things like reproduction and growth. And they don't work all that well in humans, to be honest. The dramatic results that we see are in short-lived model organisms in the laboratory, but they're better than nothing. So they have.
You said they're better than nothing. Is that what you said?
Yeah, they have value. Okay. Though, of course, again, one really enormous difficulty that we have with any drug really is that the value varies so much from person to person. Some drugs may be good for some people and bad for other people, or neutral for other people, and so it's very hard to generalize. But no, senolytics are another class of drug that are selectively killing these zombie cells.
Zombie cells. There you go. Yeah, and I've just started to take some of those myself. I haven't seen any results yet, although I am walking a little bit more spry, which is not a bad thing. But in all seriousness, you have your recent work is focused on a combination of rejuvenation treatments in mice, and I'm wondering if you can, because we've gone from looking at how mice really are sort of the next step as human beings. And I'm wondering, can you elaborate on the significance of the research and the potential relevance in terms of how we might be using them where it really does count?
Yeah, totally. So, well, you're quite right. First of all, let me address what you just said about the relationship between what works in mice and what works in humans. And it's just genuinely true. It's definitely true that a lot of things that work in mice don't work in humans. In fact, most things that work in mice don't work in humans. But if something works in mice, it's more likely to work in humans than it is if it doesn't work in mice. So it's still worth doing mouse experiments. Also, it gives an idea of what might be possible. I mean, even if something that works in mice needs some tweaks in order to work in humans, you've still got some kind of, demonstration of proof in principle that the thing can work. So it's valuable in its own right. And so that's really why we're doing this work, for both of those reasons.
Right.
And, it's working pretty well. We are, at the moment, we've got one huge experiment going. It cost $3.5 million to get going. It's got 1,000 mice. And we've got 4 different treatments that we're giving these mice, very different from each other. One is a stem cell therapy, one is a gene therapy, one is a senolytic, and one is a calorie restriction mimetic. And we are putting all of those 4 things in different subsets, different combinations into these mice. And of course, we're measuring how long they live. And we're also measuring things like how healthy they are at a given age, which is measured in many, many different ways, cognitively, physically, glucose tolerance, visual things like loss of hair. So it's a big old experiment, and that's for sure. And we definitely want to do more of these experiments because there are plenty of other interventions that are very much worthy of similar analysis at that point.
Do you believe that at some particular point we'll be able to extend human lifespan and, through the use of, from the research and from the use of some of these interventions that we've spoken about?
Of course, that's why I'm doing it. I mean, I don't have particular, I haven't dedicated my life to extending the life of mice. I think we're pretty close, actually. I think that
you think so?
We have a 50% chance or so of getting maybe 20 years of postponement of the health problems of late life in humans within the next 12 to 15 years from now. And if we can do that, then I believe that we will be at a point that I have called longevity escape velocity, which is what LEV stands for in the name of my foundation.
Beautiful.
So that is a point where we can keep going. We can continue postponing the health problems of late life faster than time is passing, which means that people who are getting the best therapies at the time at any point will be able to postpone their health problems fast enough that they will never actually get sick at all as a result of how long ago they were born.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? I know there are blue zones around the world where, on average, people live over 100 years, or you have that capability. And I don't know anyone who's lived beyond 120. But what you're talking about is, people who have the opportunity through the research that you're doing to add another 20 years. And I think that's absolutely wonderful. I know many people are wary about the potential consequences of extending the human lifespan. How do you respond to those concerns, and what do you think some of the ethical considerations that are most important in the anti-aging research?
Yeah, so of course I do get that kind of reaction all the time, and it is quite exhausting having to carry on giving the same answers to that kind of question.
Did I make a mistake?
Oh no, everyone has to do it. But yeah, I mean, thing is, the mistake is based on the fixation on the idea that aging is something qualitatively different from diseases. Like, it's perfectly okay to want to cure Alzheimer's disease or to cure cancer or whatever, right? People are happy with that. You get Nobel Prizes and so on for it. Nobody complains about the government putting lots of money into trying to do that.
Right.
But unfortunately, this is a misconception because these age-related diseases are not diseases at all. They are aspects of aging that we've chosen to give disease-like names to. And the only way we're ever going to bring them under proper medical control is by bringing the whole of aging under proper medical control. It's the same thing. And yet people, by virtue of just, adopting a confused definition, have been able to formulate this inherently inconsistent, contradictory view that, diseases are terribly bad, but aging is not. And they try to make excuses for aging. And of course, the reason we have this bizarre phenomenon, which I call the pro-aging trance, is that we've had to put aging out of our minds, ever since the dawn of civilization, because we couldn't do anything about it. And so, you're not going to want to be preoccupied by it forever, because it's horrible. So people have, adopted these irrational rationalizations, and that's only become irrational now. It was rational when it was a matter of just putting it out of your mind because you couldn't do anything. But now, doing that slows research down because it limits enthusiasm for putting proper money into the research.
So we're really not talking about like sort of aging with all the disease and all the disembodiment that we've seen in terms of, what people might think about in terms of aging. We're really talking about living longer in terms of good health and being able to go ahead and combat a lot of those diseases through the research that you're doing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's a simple soundbite on this. Lifespan is a side effect of health span. Right? The longer you stay healthy, the longer you're going to stay alive. The less long you stay healthy, the less, being sick is risky. But I just do medical research. I don't work on longevity. I work on health.
Beautiful. I like that. Can you discuss the state of, the research that you're doing and what sort of breakthroughs or advancements you're, seeing as most exciting in the place right now, most exciting to you?
Sure. Well, of course, the thing that excites me the most is the big experiment that we ourselves are doing, which doesn't have results yet. We started in February, and this is an experiment that will take maybe 2 years to complete, maybe more. The idea is that we start with mice that are about 1.5 years old, and these are mice that would normally live to about 2.5 years old. So they've got a year to live on average if you don't give them any treatments. We want to double that. We want to take them out to 3.5 years. And then a bit more than that, if you're looking at the longest lived of the mice rather than the average. So that's the thing that's exciting me most, but I haven't got much to say about it yet, except to say it's ongoing. But yes, I mean, in terms of what else is going on around the world, other people are doing, there's breakthroughs every other day. It's an extraordinary time to be in this discipline because so much is happening. The scientific community has really got the bit between its teeth when it comes to doing something about aging. Even 10 years ago, that really completely wasn't true. And now, it's a different world.
And I see your work has really attracted the attention of, various industries. You're down at Wonderland, and there's going to be a lot of biotech, biopharma, venture capital companies there, life insurance, insurance companies, technology companies. I'm wondering, how do you see these industries playing a role in the future of anti-aging research?
So I've been privileged to give lectures to pension funds and insurance companies and so on for many, many years. And, these are people who make their money from knowing and predicting reasonably accurately what's going to happen in terms of how long people will stay healthy and how long they stay alive in the future. So you'd think they'd be listening. And that is, of course, why they have me along. But it's sometimes rather difficult because what I tell them is going to happen is so far removed from what they've been brought up to think is going to happen, which is, very slow increase, if any, in the trajectory of longevity. And they just have difficulty getting their heads around it. So it's really more a matter of, repeat advertising. I have to just keep going in and saying the same thing again and not being contradicted. And of course, that's also something that's becoming more mainstream. There are, very credentialed mainstream economists saying the same kind of thing that I've been saying for a long time, and saying it with, the kind of authority that gets people to sit up and take notice who might decide that I'm some amateur.
Well, certainly you're not, and you're the founder of the LEV Foundation. I call it LEV, but LEV. Can you tell us more about the organization's mission and maybe its impact on anti-aging in the research field?
Yeah. So I guess the mission is pretty much the same as the mission of the two previous organizations that I created and led, the Methuselah Foundation and Sense Research Foundation. And we've gone through these various, transformations, largely because the field has progressed and the priorities have changed. The thing that really hangs everything together around, is I've always tried my best, and I've been privileged to succeed in playing to my strengths. In other words, basically, I kind of like being the professional heretic. I think I'm good at it. And so I focus on the things that other people are, perhaps constrained not to do. And rather than trying to work in academia in a system where I have to get my, grants approved by my colleagues, or if I have to work in a company where, shareholders matter and so on, I've been able to get into a position where my work is almost entirely funded by philanthropy. So all I have to do is talk to people who who might be interested in this area and get them to trust me. And so I have been able to work on things that other people are simply not able to work on because of their circumstance. And that continues to be the case. So what I choose to work on are obviously the things that I feel are the most neglected. It's, as I say, a very big field, very diverse, lots of different things that need to be worked on. And some of them are much more neglected than others. So I've been able to plug a few gaps over the years, shall we say.
And you're doing incredible work. And this is, as you pointed out as we started, this is incredibly important work because there's not a lot, or hasn't been a lot of research in the field. And it's not only about, living longer, but it's about living more healthy. As a healthy human being. Given your talks worldwide, from universities to major conferences, how do you approach tailoring your message to different audiences, and what do you really hope to achieve through the talks?
So yes, you're quite right. Of course, different audiences have different priorities, different ways of saying things. What I hope to achieve is really to inspire people. One thing, I guess most of the key scientific contributions that I made were more than 15 years ago now. They were in a period from the late 90s through to the early 2000s, mid 2000s. Since then, my overwhelming impact has been in community building. I mean, of course, I've been overseeing the scientific research all this time as well, but, going out and generally inspiring people. And of course, what that means is very different from one person to the next. So if I inspire someone who's an up-and-coming young scientist, then they may go into the right field. But it may be someone who's more of a journalist, and they may decide, to promote me or highlight me or interview me on the podcast or whatever. Or it might be someone who's in policy, or it might be someone who's an economist. And they've all got different ways. But the point is, what I start by doing is getting people to understand what I've always understood, namely that aging is the world's most important problem, and that even trying to contribute to apply one's talents to hastening medical control of aging is one of the most laudable ways to spend one's life that one can imagine.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So as you start talking with all these different people and you're in these conferences and meetings around the world, what advice would you give to young researchers or students that might be interested in pursuing a career in the anti-aging field?
Yeah, so it's different advice at different stages. So when a high school student comes to me and asks me, what kind of degree should I do? The number one thing that I highlight is don't specialize. Do a general biology degree as opposed to genetics or biochemistry or whatever. And that's because aging affects the body at every level of organization. So in order to understand aging well, in order to be able to understand it well enough to make a contribution to taking our work forward, you really have to have a pretty good grounding in all of the areas, whether it's physiology or biochemistry or molecular biology or genetics or whatever. At the next level, if someone's in their undergrad degree and they're thinking about what to do in research, then it's different kind of advice. It's like, ideally work in a relatively small lab, because then you'll have more influence. You won't be a small cog in a big machine. Ideally, find an area of research that really fascinates you and gives you passion, because that's the time when the first time you're going to experience the enormous frustration of research, in which nearly everything doesn't work. Things like that. And then, of course, outside research, a lot of what's necessary, and actually within research as well, is networking. So people come to me a lot just because I'm the top Google hit, and I've been around a long time. I have the biggest network, and that means that I can do a lot of just introducing people to people and getting them to be able to apply their talents in a way that dovetails well with somebody else's talents. But that doesn't scale. So what I have to help people to do is to meet each other and to get involved. One thing that's the absolute centerpiece of my community building work, and has been for 20 years, is the conferences that I run. First one I ran was 2003, 20 years ago. And I run an annual conference in Dublin now, in Ireland, Last one was a month ago. These are supreme events. They are enormous fun, which is, of course, a requirement.
Right.
They also have, obviously, the very absolute cream of speakers. But really, it's the networking that goes on in the bar through the night that is what makes the conference a can't-miss thing.
Well, we're certainly looking forward to having you down at the Wonderland conference.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering your view. We sort of touched on it as we started out, looking at psychedelics, looking at entheogens, and the work that you're doing. I'm wondering if we can maybe unpack that a little bit. Do you think that there are any specific psychedelics or entheogens that might be helpful for individuals in terms of neurogenesis or neuroplasticity, or overall a sense of being able to feel whole and embodied, so that they're less stressed or less fatigued, if you will, in terms of the aging?
So I'm going to shamelessly duck this question, but I'm also going to say something that might be useful. I'm going to duck it because two things. Number one, I'm a PhD, not an MD, which means I'm not legally allowed to give that kind of advice.
Got it.
But also, I don't actually have much expertise in it. There are plenty of other people in the field who know a lot more than me, and I would not want to try to pretend that I know as much as that. However, the way I'm not going to duck it is by highlighting the fact that psychedelics are, of course, used by a lot of people. And that tends to happen without necessarily all that much medical advice, and people, make their own regimens, they decide what works for them and everything, right? And there is therefore the potential to pool information that is gained that way, right? Let's call it self-experimentation information. Now, the more organized that process is, of, like, for example, quantifying one's physiology and one's mental state at baseline before one makes some change to what one is taking.
Setting and integration,
understanding what the actual changes are too. Anything from blood pressure all the way to, mental acuity or whatever, right? If one has good data on that from these N of 1 experiments where everyone's doing what they want, one can extract patterns from it, especially these days with the great machine learning advances that we've had. And that is something that we have needed desperately within the biology of aging for a long, long time, because there are plenty of treatments that people are interested in that may not be necessarily prescribed or not evaluated in clinical trials, but may actually be effective. And so these N of 1 experiments, especially in the past several years, have become much more prevalent. Lots of people doing their own thing. And I think, the psychedelics community and the anti-aging community can absolutely work together and learn from each other about how best to gather data from these N of 1 experiments so as to further the field more rapidly.
Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense, Aubrey. And, my view is certainly that if you can reboot, reset, reframe, if you've got stress, if you've got trauma, and you can, the efficacy rates look very high, that you can go ahead and live longer. You could be more healthy. You could go ahead and go out and exercise and have relationships and do the things that really, really feed your mind, your body, your spirit. And isn't that a good thing? Yeah,
totally.
Yeah. So looking forward, and towards the future, as we start to wrap up our time here, even though I know we've got, and I'm aware of your time frame. What are your hopes and your expectations over the next decade of, looking at, anti-aging research and maybe the potential impact on society?
So a decade is a long time these days. I would put it that way. The specific thing that I always focus on in the next decade, and in fact it's less than a decade now, it's really, we're talking about more like the next, I would say, 3 to 5 years, is that the world in general, the general public, and that means also, of course, decision makers, policy makers, governments, are going to wake up to the imminence of the medical control of aging. That's going to happen before the actual, real control of aging for humans is actually with us. It'll still be under development. But the realization that it's it's just around the corner, is going to result from experiments like the one I'm doing, my group are doing at LEV Foundation, experiments in the laboratory. Once that happens, once we get like doubling of the remaining lifespan of mice that are already in middle age before we start doing anything to them, then all hell's going to break loose, and it's going to happen very suddenly. There's going to be a kind of dam bursting thing where this whole thing that I called the pro-aging trance earlier, where people are desperately making up these irrational rationalizations to put aging out of their minds, that's all going to evaporate very suddenly. And when it does, it's going to be a bit turbulent for a little while, because of course, first of all, priorities of governments are going to change. Then, the economy is going to be very disrupted, because people are going to want very different pension plans, very different life insurance and health insurance and so on, because of differences in their expectation of how long they're probably going to live, even though that expectation is predicated on the arrival in time of therapies that don't yet exist, and so it's only a probabilistic one. So huge changes are going to happen. Now, I believe that we've got a fair chance within maybe 12 or 15 years, maybe a 50-50 chance of these medicines actually arriving. I would be surprised if they arrive as soon as 10 years from now. But really, the anticipation of their arrival is going to be the big seismic change. And that's probably, in my view, between 3 to 5 years away.
Wow. So, this is a huge field, and you've been in this field all your life. And I'm wondering for, certainly for people who want to find out more and go ahead and do their own research, they can certainly come down to the Wonderland conference and meet you. But, are there other ways that they can find out more and get a hold of you and, perhaps learn?
Sure, absolutely. So, of course, the first place to start is my foundation's website, levf.org. I'm sure you'll put that in the show notes or something like that. And there's a contact form there, and you can write to us, you can write to me. We're very, very good at responding to things like that. There are quite a few general audience books. I wrote one of my own about 15 years ago, which is still quite relevant. And lots of my colleagues in the field, lots of my prominent colleagues have written general audience books in the past few years. There's no shortage of sources of information now.
Excellent. Well, I again really want to thank you. I'm looking forward to meeting you at the Miami conference.
Sure, totally. Likewise.
Thank you, Dr. de Grey, for joining us today on sharing your extensive knowledge and insights on the future of aging research. We're grateful to have you as a keynote speaker for the Wonderland Miami 2023 conference and look forward to continuing to follow your groundbreaking work. As always, we encourage our listeners to explore the world of mindfulness, science, and technology, and stay tuned for our next episode.